Welcome back to another episode of Turn 1 Podcast. We're your hosts, Jeremiah
and Thomas.
And today, it's all about the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix.
It came out fiery, you could say.
Comes out hot. They come out swinging.
Usually with these, we kind of go into like practice session and qualifying, but I think we've got enough to talk about with the race and with our point standings, because if y'all haven't looked so far, we actually have a half-decent F1 season going right now in terms of points and standings.
Yeah, do we want to get into it now, or do we want to just go ahead and get into the race?
Let's get in the race. Let's go.
Okay. We're going to start this thing off with the ever so common, ever so loved Turn 1 breakdown. Here's the thing. There's two Turn 1 breakdowns. For this first one, the order, well, it doesn't really matter, because the order doesn't change for the second one, except for there's two people missing. So that's the part we're actually going to talk about here. Because as everybody gets through turn 1 just fine, that's great. Yuki, he has not the best release, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Doesn't really count. Because as they go into turn 2, Daniel Ricciardo, who is out wide coming out of turn 1, gets back onto the racing line, swings to the outside going into turn 2, but he is met with Alex Albon, who's trying to go for a pass along the outside. They clip tires, Albon's front left to Ricciardo's back right. Ricciardo is sent spinning, slaps the wall, and unfortunately Alex Albon is not able to recover the car. He's going to slap the wall. Also, both drivers out.
So everybody kind of ahead of that got away relatively clean. You had Max covering off Sergio, which he does to whoever's in second. Max always covers them off.
Max covers off whoever's in second.
You had the Ferraris behind, the McLarens behind. They were kind of going single file through those first couple of turns. We see this at the Suzuka Circuit, and we see this at a couple other places on the grid where you shoot off the line. You've got a little bit of a straightaway to get up to speed, and then you go into a braking zone. This particular track, you go into a braking zone that turns right at turn 1. And a lot of drivers up in the lead will go single file through that if they're playing it safe. We saw this in Australia as well. Some of the drivers at the back, though, that are trying to make moves, especially if you're a driver maybe like Yuki that maybe loses a place or two off the jump, you start going 3 wide. You start going 2 wide going into that turn 1, and you now have to carry that through turn 2. And sometimes it gets a little crowded. So what you end up seeing at the race start was you have Lance Stroll on the outside. If you're looking like as the driver's perspective, he's on the far left. You have Daniel Ricciardo smack in the middle of the track, and then on the right you have Alex Albon, who's at the far right limits of the track edge. He doesn't have anywhere else to go.
No.
And so I think me and Jeremiah differ on this, and we'd love your comments as to how you saw this incident unfold. Originally, it was thought Daniel Ricciardo, and I guess this is still the going notion, that he was watching Lance Stroll off to his left. He sees that he needs to give Lance room or whatever it is, and so he moves a little bit right to get back in the racing line and avoid Lance. But in doing so, he cuts off Alex Albon, and they both go off into the grass. I don't think Lance played a factor in that. I thought they were separated by good enough a space where Danny didn't need to move at all to accommodate Lance. I think Daniel Ricciardo should have known that Alex Albon was on the edge of the track to his right and to give him room. What is your thought?
It's tough because you can't look at both mirrors at the same time. I mean, it's impossible.
You want to bet?
And, okay, well, if you're cross-eyed, I guess.
Let me get kicked by a donkey real quick and let me talk to you.
Regardless of what might happen medically to you, most people can't look at both rearview mirrors at the exact same time. And unfortunately, since we've never actually sat in one of the cars, we don't know what the blind spots are. So that could play a factor into this as well. But you have Alex Albon, supposedly, if you're looking, coming out of the right mirror, and I'm assuming Lance Stroll in the left mirror. We had Lance Stroll going around the outside of turn 1 of Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo holds position, and yeah, there was some good space between them, but I think Daniel's eyes were focused on the left rearview mirror so that he could see Lance Stroll and make sure that there was plenty of space so they get through turn 2 just fine with no issues. I don't think that he was looking to the right. I don't even think he knew Alex Albon was a factor in this. I mean, you talked about how they were going into 3 wide, but they really weren't going into turn 1. Going into turn 1, it was just Lance and Ricciardo. Alex Albon didn't come into this until after turn 1, where he slipped up the inside. And then because now it's down on the outside for turn 2, he starts making a play on Daniel Ricciardo. And Daniel, who is just trying to make sure that they have plenty of space so that they can continue this 2 wide going into turn 2, now doesn't realize that it's a 3 wide, and unfortunately Albon and him collide. That back right tire of Ricciardo splits, and he is just sent spinning. But it's tough because, like I said, we don't know what the blind spots are. So Alex Albon could have been in a blind spot, but regardless, I don't even think that Daniel Ricciardo's eyes were over there. I guarantee you that his eyes were just over to the left.
So right after that, you have an immediate safety car, which is then followed by a pretty quick red flag thereafter.
Obviously.
Let's stay on this a little bit before we go into the race restart, because there's a lot that happens with this. Okay, so one, let's start with the Williams angle. Williams is in a tough spot.
Yeah.
Williams, as y'all know, replaced Logan Sargent a few weeks ago because they didn't have a car for him. Not replaced him, they just took him out.
Well, they didn't have a car for Albon,
Yeah.
so they just gave him Logan.
So they replaced Logan with Albon. And so Logan didn't race. And going into this race, they only had the 2 chassis. And now you destroy Alex's, essentially. And then, as we'll get to later on in this episode, Logan doesn't destroy his, but definitely roughs it up a little bit as he comes out of the gravel pit in the wall. And Williams, as y'all know, is a very small company compared to the likes of Red Bull and Mercedes and Ferrari. They're family owned still, I think, even though they're not family run anymore. They brought in other people because Claire stepped down. They just don't have the resources to handle this much mess in this short amount of time. And not to mention, Alex is a standout driver who's probably going to get a seat somewhere else after this, and they're going to have to replace Logan because Logan's not it.
Well, see, this also hurts Alex's, what would you call it, repertoire, or reputation, I guess.
Maybe, but I don't think he's at fault for this at all.
No, but it's also the fact that he can't seem to stop crashing the car. And no matter, regardless if it's your fault or not, if you're constantly involved in the wreck, that means that you're constantly going for moves when you should probably know that you need to play it a little bit safer. Like we saw how Max Verstappen used to be way more aggressive in the past. And yeah, he would get more overtakes, but he'd also crash more often, regardless of if it was his fault or not. So maybe Alex Albon needs to now say, okay, I understand most of the passing gets done here in the very beginning of the track, the very beginning of the race, but maybe I need to play this a little bit more safe. I've wrecked the car a bunch, cost the team a lot of money. Maybe we need to play things a little bit more safe for the next couple races until we get some extra parts built up.
And I think maybe that's some of the stuff that we won't see, because maybe behind the scenes at Williams, it's you need to get as many places as you can in the start of the race, and he's following that order. And so I think other team principals would know that. They would know the deal with his decision making.
We need to move into Daniel Ricciardo, because this has huge implications for Daniel Ricciardo, who is fighting for a possibility at the Sergio Perez spot at Red Bull, the A team. Here's the problem. He's under a lot of heat right now because he's getting beat by Tsunoda in almost every single race. And that's an issue if you're talking about having him replace Sergio Perez, because why would they pick him when they could pick Yuki Tsunoda? So that's a problem in itself. But now you have Daniel Ricciardo finally. I mean, he's right on the back of Yuki Tsunoda in qualifying. They are so close. It's perfect. He's now bringing the fight to Tsunoda. He's starting in 11th, Tsunoda in 10th. They're right in front of each other. And that happens to Ricciardo. I mean, come on, man.
I'll be honest. I don't think Yuki or Daniel are in contention for the Red Bull A seat right now. I don't know if Daniel will get another contract after his current one. I think there's been too many issues, too many mistakes, injuries, no performance results on the track. I mean, they thought he was going to come back and get points in almost every race, even if he's just getting 10th in every race. And we haven't seen that. We didn't see it last year in the races he ran. We don't see it this year.
And they have the car. That
RB
car is
decent.
In my opinion, it's the fastest back marker.
We see Yuki jump off the line at the second restart, which we'll get to, and he's got pace. And I think this is kind of the end of the road for Daniel Ricciardo.
I don't want to say that.
He's not peak Daniel Ricciardo anymore.
I'm not going to say that, but I see your points. They are valid. I personally believe that it'll click. I think it needs a little bit more time.
There's so many young up-and-comers, too, now that...
Which they're not even looking at, though. That's the problem.
But for the
if
they
were going to replace Sergio, the top contenders are who? Alex Albon, who's a standout veteran.
Right.
Or Carlos Sainz, who's a standout veteran.
But
they're not even looking at the
But what I'm saying
guys.
is, for that RB seat, which is supposed to be a young up-and-comer seat, Daniel Ricciardo's not that anymore.
No.
He's definitely declining, right? Like, he's not going to...
He's not going
to hit a stride.
I can't agree with you on that, unfortunately.
He's not going to pull a Fernando Alonso comeback or a Lewis Hamilton, resurgence, I don't think.
So that being said, we need to bring this into the second restart. We know the implications of the Williams team, that Alex Albon's crash on the Williams team financially, and the implications on Daniel Ricciardo's career and future spot, possibly in Formula One. Let's move into the second restart. This one's about the same in terms of what happens in the front of the grid. Everybody files in. I mean, you have Leclerc making a run, but ultimately doesn't get the
Just
move
real
done
quick,
until...
if y'all were watching the race, just know that the order shown on the screen was not the actual race order.
No, there was a problem. They had Yuki and Lance way at the back. That wasn't the case. It was a restart of exactly how the race started, minus the two drivers.
We were sitting here arguing before we filmed, and we had to go back and watch the broadcast to figure out where everybody was. So just take that out of your head if you're like, oh, there were so many moves out of the actual first start. No, there wasn't.
So you had Leclerc making a move, but he doesn't actually get the move done until probably around turn 2 or 3. I can't remember which turn it was, but it's not off of turn 1. So the top 10 pretty much stay the exact same. You have, minus Nico Hülkenberg, who started 10th.
Yeah.
And he... we listened to his onboard. He had some kind of weird gear problem. I don't know if he accidentally shifted to second or if he slipped a gear, what happened there, but he can't get the car going and immediately falls to the very back of the grid.
You can't see the back of the wheel, so you don't know what their hands are doing.
Right.
Lewis has always had the thing where he covers up so that he can't downshift, but on Nico, if anything, it sounded like he clicked too many times up, or if it was a car thing, maybe he didn't do anything at all.
Right, so instead of going to first... And it could have been he was trying to go to first and slipped to second, or maybe he just accidentally clicked it too many times and went up to second. Regardless, it definitely sounded like some kind of gearing issue. He falls all the way to the back of the grid, so goodbye, Nico, which hurt my heart so much because he was so high up.
And you projected him to finish.
It bothered me so much. Magnussen didn't have the best start either. He kind of gets bogged down by Hülkenberg as he's trying to come up on the back of him. Yuki Tsunoda makes a great play as he immediately passes 3 people. He gets off the line great.
Yuki shoots off to the right, makes 3 overtakes within a half a second of the race restarting. Fantastic.
I don't remember who it was, but somebody locks up in front of him, and when they lock up in front of him, they also push the person that was behind them wide, and they have to kind of get on the brakes. So immediately Yuki, who's back behind them, finds that opening, cuts it to the inside, and makes 2 more overtakes after already getting somebody off the line. Great start for Yuki. The rest of the grid kind of falls exactly in where it were. They kind of get in line and they go through the rest of the race from there. But the 2 big things to take away from that is the Nico gear issues that drops him to the back, and Yuki getting the great start and passing 3 people off the bat.
Looking at the rest of the race, it was a strategical battle. Is that how you'd say it?
Yeah, it was a lot of pits. So the wear and tear, they were already on the hardest that Pirelli bring, the hardest compounds. They were on the C1, C2, and C3. So it's as hard as it gets. They doesn't get any better. But that track was destroying these tires.
They kept saying that it was really hot and it's like a black asphalt, so it was eating up the tires, I guess.
The degradation was terrible.
Yeah. So you had a lot of pit stops. Couple of notes before we get in. There were some end of the race battles. Steak is awful at pit stops. They have had a mistake. They have had a mistake in every single race, right?
Oh, it's bad.
Every race they've had a bad pit stop.
Their fastest pit stops like 3.84 seconds.
And in this race, the very first pit stop for Bottas was 8+, like between 8 and 9, because they had another wheel gun issue. And then they bring in Zhou, and it looks like his pit stop is flawless, but then the car just sits there for like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And then he takes off. And it was like 4.8 or something like that. Why can they... What did they change? Who did they fire at Alfa Romeo to cause this?
That's where it gets weird for me, right?
It's the same team.
It's the exact same people, isn't it?
That's what I thought.
Maybe I'm wrong. I thought that it was just like a technical partnership with Alfa Romeo.
Like a name change.
Yeah, but they were Alfa Romeo Sauber, and now they're Kick Steak F1 Sauber.
Steak,
it's still Sauber.
Whoever you fired before this season starts, go rehire them. Like instantly.
Spend the entire offseason doing pit stops.
In the dark, like Red Bull. So you had Steak doing that. Another bottom feeder. Alpine's nowhere to be found. I mean, we won't cover this every single race of the year if it continues to be like this, but it still, I think, stands out so much in our head that Alpine's garbage.
They looked promising. I mean, they would get some good jumps, the early pit stops, and then they would be up ahead in front of everybody, but then eventually everybody would catch back up, and then one by one you'd see, oh, there goes Tsunoda past Pierre. Nope, now he's past Ocon. There goes Bottas. He's past Pierre. Now he's past Ocon. There goes Lance Stroll, past Pierre, then past Ocon. And once again, they're back in the back.
It used to be, if you watched F1 2 or 3 seasons ago, you know how they would start races out of order, and the announcers would always say, well, they're out of order, and it'll sort itself out.
Yeah.
Alpine was always one of those teams that would start down, and they would say, oh, they're going to...
Yeah, they'll even out.
Yeah, they'll get back up into the top 10 or whatever it was.
Right.
Now they're the teams getting relegated back down. They kind of quali a little bit higher than they're
Ocon had a great qualifying. Oh, don't worry. That'll sort out.
Yeah, it'll
He'll
sort
be back
itself
in 17th.
And then, okay, I'm a little confused on this. So if y'all watch the broadcast, I hate when they're showing a driver's onboard. Like in this specific thing, I think we're watching Charles Leclerc onboard, but then they play a radio message from Esteban Ocon.
Yeah.
And I get very confused about who that was. I think Pierre hit Esteban.
What?
Like a little tap. And I think it was...
Oh, yes!
And it was Esteban saying, hey, can you check my car? I got bumped by Pierre. But we were watching Charles's onboard.
Yeah, and then they went back and they showed the replay of this. So Pierre was up ahead of Ocon a little bit. But I guess Pierre was getting sandwiched by a car to the right of him. So he comes over to the left. And the middle part of Pierre's car taps the wheel of Ocon.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I don't know how Pierre didn't take damage because it was right on the middle of his side pod. And
that car is basically rolling damage anyway. Doesn't really matter.
That's bad, dude. That's really bad. They got some things to figure out.
Here's the other thing. Man, Mercedes.
This breaks my heart.
Mercedes is struggling, guys.
This breaks my heart.
Lewis is struggling. George will hit on some points, and then he'll have horrible races. And then he'll hit on some points, and he'll have horrible races. He's continuing his inconsistency from last year. Their car is on pace with Aston Martin.
So because their car is so bad, they had to make up for it in the strategy. They went with a bold strategy, left the boys out there way too long, in my opinion. Way too long. And because of that, by the time that they finally got into the pits, you know, I mean, it's sad because all the guys that were pitting early that were ahead of them, oh, great, now Mercedes is ahead of them. But they left Mercedes out there so long that everybody that ended up behind them because they pitted early passed them, and then they're right back in their spot, and then they pit.
I think McLaren kind of set off a chain because McLaren sent Norris on the undercut, and that triggered the Ferraris and the Red Bulls.
Right.
And Mercedes just didn't follow the pack.
Not at all.
And the problem is they don't have a car to not be able to follow the pack with.
And then you hear Lewis coming on the radio, and he's like, change strategies, man.
Yeah, literally change strategies, and they're like, yes, we're working on it.
Meanwhile, 2 laps later, box.
But there is a clear gap. Obviously, there's a gap between Red Bull and everybody else, but there's a clear gap between what Ferrari and McLaren are doing and what Aston and Mercedes are doing.
There's still, I would say, in my opinion, a slight gap between Ferrari and McLaren. I still say that Ferrari's got it.
It's a little gap, but they're in the same tier.
It's narrowed.
Yeah.
It's narrowed quite a bit. McLaren, and this is kind of our segue into the next segment here, McLaren looked good in this race. They looked fast. They looked like they were competing with Ferrari. I enjoyed it.
Again, if you're using a tier system, Red Bull is tier 1 or A tier. Tier B, I think you have to group Ferrari and McLaren together, even if Ferrari's a little bit faster.
Yeah.
I think we agree on that.
Yeah.
Maybe their drivers are overall a little bit better than the McLaren drivers. But McLaren, they're not even rolling out significant upgrades yet. I think the drivers are just dialing in that car. Their strategy maybe is better. Their setup is better. Maybe the camber on the tires is
Honestly,
better. I don't know.
That track could have suited McLaren's car for all I know. I don't really know the full exact, engineering aspects of their car. But
it's close.
They looked good.
It's very close, and I'll be interested to see once we get to like Monaco week or something, we'll see some major upgrades come out, and we'll see where
at the beginning of the season we were talking about how Mercedes and McLaren were pretty much on par, but it's almost like McLaren has now jumped tiers, and now they're up with the Ferraris.
In our early season projections, which I'll try to link if I can remember it, we thought that Mercedes and McLaren would be kind of that 3A, 3B or whatever team rolling through the season, but I think it kind of started like that race 1, and then ever since then we've seen it separate a little bit more and more.
Yeah.
But I think Ferrari's established himself as the number 2 team, which if you're a Ferrari fan is pretty nice.
I'd agree.
Although I think Leclerc is ahead of Carlos in the points. He shouldn't be.
No.
Because Carlos had an appendicitis and got replaced by Ollie Behrman for a race.
Speaking of Charles Leclerc, I'll take this into the next little part here. Charles Leclerc, because he started so far back on the grid, they left old boy out there forever on those tires. And I'm sitting here thinking, he's going to start dropping down. This isn't good. No, he's going to hold pace with the rest of them on these old tires as if he's sitting there whispering to them. So Charles Leclerc gets the Tire Whisperer award for this race.
I agree. I think every year we see one race a year where a driver just does something spectacular. What was that race? Was it last year or 2 years ago when Alex Albon did 58 laps in Australia with those tires?
Yeah.
Like, you just see something magical. And this wasn't quite on that level, but Leclerc and Ferrari overall, I think, have figured a lot of stuff out. They're having far less strategic issues.
Oh, yeah.
Their car is seemingly more reliable than it has been in previous years. They're not just...
Although their bodies are not.
No, but they're not exploding at the rate they used to.
No, but the appendix is. I got a lot of them, man.
Like, I don't know if it was a Matteo Binotto thing. I don't know if Fred Vasseur is the guy making all these major changes, but it's seeming like they've gotten rid of a lot of the things that were causing them to lose points. We've always known Ferrari's fast. We've always known Ferrari's had one of the fastest cars on the grid outside of Red Bull. It's been that way for the past 5 seasons.
Yeah.
They just couldn't piece everything together in a race weekend to get the points they would need. Over the past 4 races, though, I think they're doing everything they can to keep up with Red Bull. They're not too far off, honestly.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump around here on our little list.
Sure,
since we're talking about Ferrari, I do want to talk about Sainz's triumphant battle at the end to go from, what was he at, 5th to a podium spot. Now, Leclerc, obviously, he was kind of a sitting duck out there on some old tires, and, Carlos had just pit. He's on the fresh tires. Carlos gets the overtake done on Lando Norris, though, which was the impressive part. And then from Lando Norris, he's able to then get in front of Charles Leclerc. And it almost looked, obviously he wasn't going to, but it looked like he was making headway on Sergio Perez. I was impressed. He locked in that podium.
This was set up because, again, Lando Norris ran the undercut, which worked. Lando Norris came out ahead of both Carlos and Sergio Perez.
Yeah, he was up there with Max.
And then Sergio, of course, worked his way up, which was actually impressive because we haven't really seen, last year we didn't really see Sergio do that. He would come out in 5th and stay in 5th. We saw him work up to 2nd, and then Carlos did the same thing.
Yeah, we saw Lando's undercut was impressive. We saw when Max pit and Lando pit, they came out and it was Leclerc, Max, and Lando, and obviously Max was catching up to Leclerc, but so was Lando. Lando was keeping up with Max, and then we saw Max go through Leclerc like it was nothing, slide through, and it looked like Lando was going to do the same thing. Now, that didn't end up happening, and then Leclerc eventually pit, and, we had a whole scramble of the order there, but it really looked like Lando was hanging with Max for a little bit there up until he got into open air.
And we'll still never know if that's Max just
taking it easy
or if that's, like, legit.
You could give him a pillow and a blanket in that car. Take a nap.
But we are seeing that Lando Norris and his McLaren, Oscar's close, but he's a little bit off the pace. Lando Norris and McLaren and the 2 Ferrari drivers are dialed in right now at this part of the season. They're not Max. They're probably still not Sergio, but they're close.
I'd agree.
Okay, you want to talk about your battle for 10th?
I enjoyed the battle for 10th.
His battle for 1 point.
Oh, because that's all you get to watch.
Which actually paid out in my favor.
Yeah, because your predictions. You had Yuki in the 10th spot.
Getting 10th.
In his hometown.
Yeah.
Getting the points. The hometown hero.
And I was berated.
You weren't. But the battle for 10th was intense. You had Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin Magnussen, who were on wild strategies from Haas, in my opinion. And you had Lance Stroll out there who kept looking promising, kept making overtakes. You had Yuki Tsunoda, who was out there in that battle. And then Valtteri Bottas was out there in that battle as well.
Yeah, recovering from his team's poor pit stops.
Yeah, but way to go, Bottas. He was out there fighting for it. Every time that you would see Yuki make an overtake, Bottas was right behind him. You would see,
Again, the state car isn't a bad car.
Their team's just bad.
Their team's just bad.
So this battle, I really didn't know how it was going to play out. I mean, you had Kevin Magnussen staying out on the tires really, really late, and they were trying to get around him, and he was blocking everybody off, putting some serious distance between the top 9 drivers and the bottom 11. Well, I guess no, because minus 2 drivers, but you know what I mean. The bottom drivers.
Yeah.
Putting some great distance. Magnussen held him off. Defense was A1. Magnussen pits. You had Hülkenberg up at the top after everybody pits, and Hülkenberg, here's my problem. When Yuki Tsunoda and everybody came out and they had fresh tires, the gap between Yuki and Nico Hülkenberg was 20 seconds. In that moment, I'm yelling, pit. Pit Hulk right now. Get him out on some fresh tires. He's in this fight. Then the gap is 18 seconds. Then it's 16. Then it's 15. Then it's 14. All the way down to Yuki's right up on him. And at that point, like the entirety of this time, I'm just yelling, Pit Hulk! What are you doing? It was aggravating. They never did. And eventually Yuki gets a pass on Hulkenberg, and then they're like, hey, we should probably pit him. Then they pit Hulk. I was so furious, man, because it really looked like we had a good chance for Hulk to get points. Here's where it was, though. In my opinion, here's what was happening. The reason they left Hulkenberg out there so long is because after they saw how well Magnussen was able to battle off everybody and keep them behind him, everybody had just pit that was in front of Hulk, and they go to the back. Now Hulkenberg's out there in front. He's on some older tires, but he's out in front. And there was a 20-second gap. So as long as Hulk can, whisper to the tires a little bit and make them last a little bit longer, eventually everybody catches up to Hulk. But in that time, laps have passed. Those tires that they just got on those pit stops are no longer as fresh as they were. So in my opinion, what I think that they were going for is that Hulk basically just stays out while everybody else gets a pit stop in, and then he basically skips a pit, and then he pits when they all pit again. So he's coming out on fresh tires when everybody else is, maybe a little bit earlier, so that he can get that jump on everybody. And now we have Hulk up in 10th. That's what I thought the strategy was going to end up being, and it looked like it was going to play out up until Tsunoda got the overtake, and it started to see Hulk drop back, and that's when they finally just pulled the trigger and pitted him. But I really thought, and he ended up in 11th, so kudos to that, but I really thought we were going to see Hulk in the points again.
But we didn't. We saw Yuki Tsunoda in the points, which, if y'all watched our predictions videos, that was my wild card, was Yuki Tsunoda getting points in his home race.
Kudos to Yuki. I can't take it away from him. His overtakes around the outside, that man was a savage. He had multiple overtakes around the outside in corners where you shouldn't overtake.
Again, that RB has some pace.
It was great,
for
man.
A bottom-tier car.
I think as far as stake, Haas, Williams, Alpine go, I think RB is the top of that tower.
Almost on the verge of a midfield, but still clearly behind the Aston and the Mercedes.
Right.
Okay, so, one thing. 2 really good overtakes in this race, and you brought this up as a potential in our preview episode. So 130R, there's several iconic.
I love it.
There's some iconic turns at the Suzuka Circuit. One is 130R, another is the Spoon. But you had Lando Norris get a really good pass on Lewis Hamilton.
I couldn't tell you.
There. And then right after that, you had Sergio Perez do it. And then the very next lap, Sergio Perez does it again on George Russell. It was Hamilton and then Russell. Flat out, full speed, going around a bend, doing an overtake. Possibly one of the best scenes in Formula One.
Yeah, 130R is historic. I feel like you see a lot of overtakes there because they get great exits out of the Spoon, heading straight into 130R. And as they get to 130R, you either take the outside, or maybe if the car in front of you gives a little leeway, you kind of throw it up the middle or throw it up the inside, and you go flying up that inside, all full throttle, no lift whatsoever, and get the overtake done. Kudos to Sergio for that.
So your race ends, and obviously Max wins, and Sergio gets second, and Carlos got third, correct?
Yep.
When you look at the points for the year, though, this is what I pulled up on the screen just now. It's a pretty good season,
Fernando Alonso, you're about to talk about with the points thing.
Yeah.
So I want to bring up one more thing that happened in this race. Fernando Alonso battled off Oscar Piastri in these last couple laps, so much so that eventually Oscar was in trouble with George Russell, and they started battling, which let Alonso just sail into the sunset.
Yep.
It was beautiful. Well done. I love that.
I don't know where the gap is between Oscar and Lando right now, but at the end of that race, Oscar was definitely struggling. Because George was also struggling, yet George was taking a battle to Oscar, so that kind of showed you there was some kind of weird gap there. But as we look at the points for the year, looking at the driver specifically, you have Max obviously in first with 77, then the gap down to Sergio with 64. But that's where it gets interesting. Sergio's at 64, then you have Leclerc at 59, and Sainz at 55, with missing a race.
Which is wild.
So you have a 3-way battle right now for second place that is pretty legitimate.
Which should belong to Carlos, but
if he had raced where Ollie Berman raced, because Ollie got 6 points.
Yeah, but Carlos
would have done better.
A race win. Sergio doesn't.
So you have that, and then you go right into the McLaren. So there's a little bit of a gap. You drop down. You have the McLarens at 37 and 32, and then you drop down to the Astons and Mercedes, which Mercedes right now is only 1 point up on Aston Martin, and that is solely because Lance Stroll did not get a 10th place finish in this last race.
Yeah. Now, you might be saying, well, yeah, but both Mercedes crashed out last race. Yeah, both Mercedes were out last race. That's a thing.
That happens.
It happens in the sport, and you got to work around it.
Just like Max was out in a race. Just like Carlos Sainz had his appendix explode.
Yeah, you got to work around
Things
it.
happen.
If one of your drivers, Lewis Hamilton, doesn't finish a race, it's your job as the other teammate to make sure the team gets points. And George Russell binned it. It happens.
Yeah. So I think, there's we've brought this up a couple times on the show, and there's a lot of talk about it, obviously, in the F1 community. Yes, Max is going to win the world championship. Don't worry about that. Red Bull's going to win the constructors. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Care about who's going to finish second in the drivers. Care about who's going to finish second in the constructors. We have legit battles going on right now. Care about where Mercedes is as a team right now. They are struggling, and they're losing Lewis after this year. What do you do? Care about where Alpine and Williams are. Alpine and Williams have, now of course Williams has been down lower than Alpine has, but they have both fallen off these massive cliffs recently where Alpine started the season horribly and it's going horribly. Williams started off the season with a little bit of hope. They had Albon, who was really starting to get somewhere. They had Logan coming back for a second year. Maybe he figured something out, and now suddenly they don't have any cars. Do they have the money to get more cars? Do they have the time to get more cars? There is so much happening outside of the number one spot in F1 right now. This is a really good Formula One season happening right now.
Yeah. It's like we said in previous episodes, you can't focus on the front runners whenever there's a dominant season happening, which Max and Red Bull are running away with it. It's really the rest of the grid. And it's like you said, it is super exciting. We have so much action going on. And I'm sure as, car teams bring upgrades, cars get faster. Maybe some teams, they bring upgrades and they fail and they don't do so good. We're going to see this whole thing mix around, especially with how close everybody is. But for right now, it's looking really exciting for the rest of the season.
Guys, in the comments, right now, project the final 5 in the constructors for the end of the year. I want to know how you have them stacked up and ranked.
Ooh, that's good. Guys, if you think that Daniel Ricciardo gets a resurgence, finishes 3rd in this next Grand Prix, I'm right there with you.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.